You said last week that you expected the AMC to be up and running and to have resolved issues with the affected banks by the end of September. Things still on track to meeting that target?
Yes, I think so. What happened at the Senate obviously last week was a slight setback and just really bureaucratic. There were some documents that were supposed to be accompanied by the bill under Senate laws that did not go. But yesterday, two things happened, Alicia. First, the House of Representatives has actually passed the bill finally. So it's gone through the entire process at the House of Reps. And with the Senate, what we've had was the second reading, which means after the public hearing next week, hopefully another 2 weeks after that, we should get Senate approval.
Now, I know that the Central Bank of Nigeria has said that it hopes that unguarded speculations with the new or unguarded speculations around political support for the reforms have been put to rest. But there are still a lot of question marks around this bill and the hurdles it faces moving forward. We've tackled the issue of political risk before, but a lot has unfolded since. And still, the discussion out there seems to be that political risk presents a clear and present danger to the CBN's autonomy and could derail the entire process. So your response to that, given the developments that we saw yesterday?
Well, I hope that the developments have actually put to rest some of these speculations. I think there are a number of things happening, Alicia. On the one hand, there's a lot of wishful thinking. There are a lot of people who would hope that with any kind of change in political power or any kind of shift or change in leadership of the country, the reforms will be set back and maybe the new president is going to soft pedal on the reforms. I think it's a lot of wishful thinking, frankly. It's people who don't know him and who don't know how he thinks. And I think it's people who don't understand that all along we have carried the entire leadership of the country along in these reforms. There's also the second level of concern, which is people who exaggerate minor hurdles. These things are not easy. Nobody said it was going to be easy. This country doesn't have an infrastructure for dealing with distressed banks. What we've had historically was that any time a bank had insolvency, we just handed over to NDIC and liquidated the bank. The central bank cannot acquire equity in the bank. We don't have an asset management company, and we're just trying to put in place this infrastructure. Unfortunately, we're doing it in the middle of a crisis. So talking about amending the BOFIA to allow the central bank to acquire shares instead of just give loans. And we're also talking about the AMC bill, which will allow us to recapitalize the banks and buy off toxic assets. So it's these challenges that people take. Yes.
So if the passage of the AMC bill is all clear then and all goes according to plan, what deadline has been set in turn for the 8 troubled banks in terms of them having to pay back their 620 billion naira loan? Because some have suggested a recovery period beyond the set projection of the central bank.
Well, I don't know where the projections are coming from. Once the AMC bill has been passed into law and the AMC has been set up, the AMC is in a position immediately to purchase toxic assets. And once that is done, technically, the banks have enough money to pay back the central bank. Effectively, what we've done right now in giving 620 billion to the banks is to refinance those toxic assets because the banks have a lot of bad loans on their books. There's a solvency problem. Their capital has been wiped out. The AMC returns some of that capital to them, and they're then able to repay the central bank. So my sense is that certainly within the second quarter of this year, the AMC would have purchased those assets and the banks would have paid back the central bank the exposure.
Now, one of the major goals here is to free up liquidity by buying these non-performing assets. But the view out there is that increased liquidity is not necessarily going to translate into willingness to actually lend again. So we're not necessarily looking at any resolve on that front, are we? It's not a guaranteed thing.
Yes, I mean, Alicia, I'm sure everybody knows that if a banking system loses 60% of its capital, which is what Nigerian banking system has done, it's going to take a long time for banks to start lending. There was a lot of bubble capital in the system. There are a lot of macroeconomic risks. There was a lot of careless lending without risk management, and all of that has stopped. Banks are still lending, but they're not lending based on proper risk assessment criteria. Secondly, a lot still has to happen. There's too much expectation for the banks or the banking system or monetary policy to solve all the problems of the economy. There are fiscal measures that need to be taken. Infrastructure deficit is still there. The power sector and reforms have still not happened. until we have power, until we have infrastructure, until we have manufacturing getting back, there's not going to be the demand available on the other side. So the banks need worthy counterparties, and that requires fiscal policy to work along with monetary policy. I think what's been happening is that the central bank and the financial system have been going on addressing the challenges, but there has been a rather slow response on the fiscal side.
What about the rot that's possibly still left in the system? I was going through an article earlier this week, Merrill Lynch painting a drastic picture of 6 trillion naira of toxic assets in total.
Well, yes. If you look at the Q3 results of the banks, we basically totaled all the non-performing loans, and we had about 1 trillion or 1.2 trillion. Now, some of those would not be sold to us clearly. Some of them are being restructured by the banks. What we've done is to try to put in place 3 things with the AMC and with the 500 billion naira facility we want to put in at AMC, at the MPC. The AMC will purchase non-performing loans. The AMC can purchase equity and therefore recapitalize the banks. And the 500 billion naira facility, part of it will be available for restructuring existing facilities. So we do expect that some of those loans will be sold off, some of those loans will be restructured, and some of those loans would be fully provisioned on the books of banks. But we think on the outside, 1 trillion to 1.2 trillion is what the AMC will have to lay out to purchase, to clean up the system and the bad loans, and we should recover about half of that over the life of the AMC.
Governor, let's very quickly turn attention to the new management teams at these failed banks, because there's been criticism leveled at some of the interim managers that are currently in play, and that's certainly adding more flies to the ointment, if we can call it that. How closely are their approaches being monitored right now?
Well, we have every confidence in those management teams. And, Alicia, you need to remember that there are a lot of people who are very unhappy with what's happening with the banking system, and they're making a lot of noise. I mean, if you take one of the banks, I got a complaint about the managing director buying a Jeep for himself. And this was a bank where the previous CEO had bought 4 aircraft, 2 of which were in the name of her son. So you've got... or you get a complaint about a managing director paying himself or getting paid an allowance of $100,000 when the previous CEO was getting 4 times that. We have said it very clearly that these gentlemen are running banks. They're not going to be paid civil service salary. They're not earning anywhere near where the previous CEOs were earning. We've put clear caps on their salary and on their allowances. They're taking no bonuses, and they've really cut down on a lot of the fat as far as expenses are concerned. But there's a lot of attempt to discredit them. Remember, they are gathering the information. They are providing the data that's being used for prosecution. They are investigating, and they're basically discovering a lot of the corporate governance failures and theft that happened in those institutions. So we bear all of that in mind when we listen to the criticisms of these CEOs. Well,
very quickly, just to end off with, a theory out there is that the surviving banks should gain market share and emerge as strong competitors within the Nigerian banking space. What's your view there? Are we possibly going to see a shift in what has been an approach taken by the CBN, that we won't have dominant players within this arena?
Well, I think it is natural that the lay of the land will change, and I think it is appropriate that the market should reward banks that have been well run. There is generally a flight to safety. Investors generally would like to see that they put their money in banks that have shown that they are well run and they've managed their risks very well. Now, what we would like to see, hopefully, is that at the end of this exercise, the distressed banks go into institutions that command the same level of respect, so that there is a new level playing ground, but this time people are confident that all banks are run on based on best practice. But certainly the banks that have kept their books very well in the past will benefit from the circumstances that we're in at the moment.